He thought he'd finally won. He thought the moment that lawyer closed the folder and shook his hand, everything was settled. The house, the accounts, the business, all of it. He looked at me across that conference table like I was already gone, like I had never mattered. And maybe, to him, I never did. But here's what he didn't know. Here's what none of us knew yet. My grandmother had one more thing to say. I was 26 when my grandmother got her diagnosis. Stage 3. The doctor used words like aggressive, and we'll do what we can. And my grandmother sat there in that paper gown and nodded like he was reading her a grocery list. That was just who she was. Evelyn May Sutton, 71 years old, 4'11", and completely unafraid of anything. I drove her home that afternoon. She asked me to stop at the diner on Route 9 so she could get a slice of coconut cream pie, and we sat in a booth by the window and she told me she wasn't scared. "I've had a good run, sweetheart," she said. "Don't talk like that," I said. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I need someone I can count on for what comes next, and that someone is you." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I just thought she meant doctor's appointments, prescriptions, maybe helping her sort through some paperwork. I said yes without hesitation because she was my grandmother, and she had raised me, and there was no other answer. My mother left when I was 4. I don't have many memories of her, just the smell of her perfume and the sound of the door closing. My father remarried quickly. His new wife had 2 kids of her own, and I became the inconvenience in the corner room, the one who didn't quite fit. By the time I was 8, I was spending most weekends at my grandmother's house, then most summers, then eventually most of the year. Nobody really noticed I'd stopped going home. My grandmother noticed everything. She taught me how to cook on a real gas stove, how to read a lease before you sign it, how to change a tire, how to sit with people who are grieving without trying to fix anything. She ran a small catering company out of her commercial kitchen. Sutton's Table, she called it, and by the time I was in high school, I was helping her with events on weekends, setting up for rehearsal dinners, boxing up desserts at midnight, loading vans in the rain. I loved every minute of it. My father never came to any of it. He was busy with his new family, his new life. He called on birthdays sometimes. We were polite. That was the extent of it. My grandmother's business had grown over the years. By the time she got sick, Sutton's Table had 14 employees, a fleet of 3 vans, contracts with 2 hotel chains in the area, and a reputation that took her 30 years to build. She was proud of it in the quiet way she was proud of everything. Not bragging, just steady. When she told me she needed someone she could count on, I moved into her spare room 2 weeks later. I kept my part-time bookkeeping job remote and spent the rest of my time with her. Chemo days, I drove her in and sat in the waiting room with a crossword puzzle and bad coffee. Bad days, I made soup and put on old movies and didn't make her talk if she didn't want to. Good days, we walked to the end of her street and back, and she told me stories about things I'd never heard before. The early years of her marriage, what my grandfather was like, what this town looked like when she was young. My father appeared twice during those 14 months. Once at Thanksgiving, where he spent most of dinner talking about a vacation he was planning. Once around Christmas, when he pulled me aside in the hallway and asked if Mom had thought about what was going to happen to the house. I stared at him. "She's not gone yet," I said. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. But he didn't take the question back. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in March. She went quietly in her own bed, with me sitting beside her holding her hand. I had called my father 2 days before when the hospice nurse told us it was close. He arrived 4 hours after she passed. The service was small. Her friends, her employees, a few neighbors who had known her for decades. My father stood at the front in a dark suit and accepted condolences like he was the chief mourner. I stood off to the side and tried to keep it together. Her attorney's name was Mr. Aldrich. He had handled her affairs for 20 years, and he called me the day after the funeral to schedule a meeting. He said my father had already been in touch. Of course he had. We met in Mr. Aldrich's office on a Thursday afternoon. His office smelled like old books and lemon wood polish, and it was exactly the kind of place you'd expect a 70-year-old estate attorney to work. My father sat across from me in a gray blazer. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Mr. Aldrich went through the documents carefully. The primary will, signed 3 years prior, left the house and the business and the majority of liquid assets to my father, her only child. There was a small account set aside for her church, a few personal items designated for specific people, and a single paragraph near the end that left me a sum of $5,000 and a handwritten note that Mr. Aldrich said was sealed and personal. $5,000. I sat very still while Mr. Aldrich finished speaking. My father exhaled beside me. Not quite a sigh. Not quite a laugh. Something in between. So the business transfers to me, my father said. As primary beneficiary, yes, Mr. Aldrich said. We'll begin the transition process. And the house? Also to you, yes. My father leaned back in his chair. And then he looked at me for the first time since I'd walked in, and the expression on his face was not grief. It was relief, like something had just been resolved that had been bothering him for a while. You should probably figure out your living situation, he said. I'm going to need to get the property assessed. I thought I'd misheard him. What? The house. I have to figure out what to do with it. I can't have it just sitting there. I'm living there. I know. He picked at a piece of lint on his sleeve. I'll give you a few weeks, that's fair? Mr. Aldrich had gone very quiet. I noticed he wasn't looking at either of us. I looked at my father, this man who I had called twice a week for 14 months to give updates on his own mother's condition, this man who had shown up twice, who had asked about the house while she was still alive. Okay, I said. My voice was completely flat. I didn't recognize it. Good. I think that's everything. He stood up and buttoned his jacket and shook Mr. Aldrich's hand. I'll have my accountant reach out about the business transfer. He left without saying goodbye to me. I sat in that chair for a moment after the door closed. I closed. Aldrich was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ms. Sutton, he said. It's fine, I said. It wasn't. But I didn't know what else to say. I drove back to my grandmother's house, my father's house, I reminded myself, and I sat in the kitchen and I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I was too hollowed out. I made myself a cup of tea and I sat at the table where I had eaten thousands of meals and I thought about the last 14 months and I thought about my father's face in that office, that relief, and something inside me just went very, very quiet. I had 3 weeks. I had $5,000 and a sealed note. I found a room in a shared house 20 minutes away. A woman named Gwen rented out 2 rooms on the second floor, and she was practical and kind and didn't ask too many questions. I moved my things in over 2 days. It wasn't much. I hadn't accumulated a lot. I'd been living my grandmother's life for over a year. On the second night, alone in my new room, I finally opened the note. She had written it by hand in her loopy, slightly crooked cursive. Her handwriting had gotten harder to read near the end, but I knew it like I knew her voice. My darling, you gave me the last chapter of my life, and I will never be able to put into words what that meant to me. I know what I'm leaving you in that will. I know it's not what you deserve, but I need you to trust me. I need you to sit with it for a little while. Mr. Aldrich has something else for you, but not yet. There are things that need to happen first. Be patient. You were always better at that than I was. All my love. Always. Graham, I read it 4 times. Then I folded it and put it back in the envelope and held it for a long time. Mr. Aldrich has something else for you. I called his office the next morning. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. What does she mean? Your grandmother asked me to give it some time. She was very specific about the order of things. He paused. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said, which was becoming my most used phrase. How much time? 60 days from the date of the meeting. 60 days. I didn't know what to do with 60 days. I went back to my bookkeeping work, took on 2 new small clients, kept myself busy. I thought about my grandmother constantly. I thought about Sutton's table, whether my father had gone in yet, whether the staff knew what was happening. Most of those employees had worked for her for years. Rosa had been there 18 years. I wanted to call and check on them, and I made myself not. Around day 40, my father called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hey," he said. His voice was different. Tighter. "Hi. So I've been going through things with the business." A pause. "There are some complications." I waited. "The hotel contracts. There's a renewal clause I didn't know about. Apparently the contracts are tied to, they listed your grandmother by name. As the principal operator, my accountant is saying there's a question about whether they automatically transfer or whether the hotels have to approve the new ownership." "Okay," I said. "The thing is, one of the hotel managers, apparently, has been asking for you specifically. They want to know who's taking over operations. They want a meeting." I said nothing. "I was thinking," my father said slowly, "that maybe you could come in, just to help with the transition, as a consultant or whatever, just until things get settled." I thought about that office. I thought about the lint on his sleeve. "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't call him back. On day 60, I drove to Mr. Aldrich's office. He was waiting for me with a folder on his desk and 2 cups of coffee already poured. "Sit down," he said. "There's quite a bit to go over." He set a document in front of me. A codicil, an amendment to the original will, signed 14 months earlier. Signed, I realized, about 2 weeks after my grandmother's diagnosis. 2 weeks after I had moved in. She had been planning this from the beginning. I read it slowly while Mr. Aldrich sat quietly across from me. The codicil left the catering business to me, not to my father. Not the house, not the liquid accounts. But Sutton's table, in its entirety. The equipment, the vans, the client contracts, the name, the goodwill, the commercial kitchen lease. She had valued it through an independent assessment the previous year. The business was worth approximately $340,000. There was also a separate small business account I hadn't known about, seeded with her personal savings over the years, specifically for capital. It held just over $47,000. And there was a letter. Longer this time, typed this time. Notarized. She had written to her attorney. She had documented, carefully and deliberately, the role I had played in her care. The hours. The appointments. The choices I had made. She had written that she had observed, during her illness, which of her family members had shown up and which had not. She had written that the primary will reflected legal obligation, and the codicil reflected her actual wishes. She had written that she trusted Mr. Tom Aldrich to ensure both were honored in the correct order. Correct order. She had wanted my father to have his moment first. She had wanted him to feel certain. And then she had wanted this. I sat with that for a long time. "The business transfer is clean," Mr. Aldrich said. She structured it carefully. "The existing contracts, including the hotel renewals, are held under the business entity, not her personal estate. They transfer with the business." "My father called me," I said. "He said the hotels were asking for me." Mr. Aldrich nodded slowly. "Your grandmother had a relationship with those managers for years. I imagine they were not surprised by this outcome." I thought about Rosa and the other employees. 14 people who had shown up every day and built something with her. "What do I need to do?" I said. "Sign here," he said, "and then we'll talk about next steps." My father called the following week. He had heard from his accountant, who had heard from the business attorney, who had apparently spent an unpleasant hour on the phone learning about codicils. "You have to be kidding me," he said when I answered. He didn't even say hello. "Hi, Dad. She left you the business. She left you, you've been there for 14 months, and she had no right, she had every right," I said. "It was her business. I'm her son." His voice cracked on the word. Not with grief, I didn't think. With something else. Outrage. Entitlement. The sound of someone who expected to be handed something and wasn't. I'm going to contest it. I'm going to talk to a lawyer. You should talk to a lawyer, I said. Mr. Aldrich can explain the codicil process. The document is solid. She had it prepared 14 months ago, and it was witnessed and notarized, and there's a letter on file documenting exactly why she made the decision she made. Silence. She planned this, he said. Quieter now. Yes, I said. She did. More silence. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. So what am I supposed to do? He finally said. Not angry anymore. Just lost. It was the most honest I'd ever heard him sound. And here's the thing I didn't expect. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like some score had been settled. I just felt tired and sad and like I was finally seeing my father clearly for the first time. Not as the parent I had needed him to be, but as the person he actually was. A man who never learned how to show up. A man who never learned how to show up. A man who maybe didn't know how. I don't know, I said, but I have a business to run. I called Rosa that afternoon. She already knew. Mr. Aldrich had notified the staff. And when she heard my voice, she started crying and I started crying, and we stayed on the phone like that for a while, not saying much. I went in the next Monday morning. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the early prep work for a Friday event, and every person in that room stopped what they were doing when I walked in. Rosa hugged me. The younger line cooks, I barely knew, looked at me carefully, waiting to see what kind of person I was going to be. I thought about my grandmother standing in this kitchen 30 years ago. I thought about what she had built, plate by plate, event by event, handshake by handshake. Okay, I said. Let's talk about what's on the calendar. The hotel meeting happened 3 weeks later. The manager, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Ferraro, shook my hand and said she'd heard a lot about me over the years, and she was glad to know who she was working with going forward. We renewed both contracts. My father texted me about 2 months after all of it, not to fight. Just a short message. I know I handled things badly. I don't really know how to fix it. I stared at my phone for a long time. I wrote back, I don't either, but I'm not going anywhere. I don't know if that's a beginning or just an acknowledgement that some things don't have clean endings. My grandmother would probably say that's the most realistic kind of story there is. She was right about most things. She was right about this too. Sutton's table has 8 events booked for next quarter. Rosa is training 2 new people. I bought a used band last month to replace the oldest one in the fleet. And every morning when I unlock that kitchen door and smell the coffee and the prep work and all of it, I think about a woman who loved me enough to plan 2.5 years ahead, who knew exactly what she was doing, who trusted me to wait. I was always better at that than she was, she said. I'm trying to make sure she was right. If you're watching this from somewhere in the middle of your own hard chapter, the part where it feels like everything went to someone who didn't earn it, I want you to sit with this one thing. Sometimes the people who love us most are still working on our behalf, even when we can't see it yet, even after they're gone. Don't give up on what you know is true about yourself. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. The rest has a way of finding its place. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother actually did. Not just the legal part. The codicil, the timing, the letter on file with Mr. Aldrich, but the thinking behind it, the patience behind it. She knew, 14 months before she died, exactly how this was going to go. She knew my father would show up after the fact. She knew he'd look at what she built and see a number instead of a life's work. She knew I'd be handed $5,000 and a room I had to vacate in 3 weeks. And she let it happen on purpose, because she understood something I'm still learning. That some people need to feel certain before you can show them they were wrong. That's not cruelty. That's wisdom. There's a difference, and I used to confuse the two. I think about the choices I made during those 14 months, and I don't think of them as sacrifice anymore. I made them because she was my grandmother, and I loved her, and it was the right thing to do. That's it. I wasn't calculating. I wasn't positioning myself for some future reward. I was just showing up because someone needed me and I was able to. That's a choice anyone can make, and most of the time, nobody's watching and nobody's keeping score, and there's no codicil waiting at the end of it. But here's what I've come to understand: the kind of person you are when no one is watching. That's the only real version of you. My father spent decades being a certain kind of son when it was convenient, and a different kind when it wasn't. That's not a character flaw you can fix with an apology text. It's a pattern. And patterns have weight. They accumulate. Eventually, they settle into outcomes, and those outcomes feel sudden to everyone except the people who were paying attention. My grandmother was paying attention her entire life. I used to want my father to see me, to acknowledge what I'd done, what I'd given up, what I'd shown up for. I realize now that need was about me, not him. He was never going to give me that, not because he's a monster, but because he genuinely could not see past his own version of the story. Some people are like that. You can spend years trying to rewrite their script, and all you do is exhaust yourself. What actually changed things, for me, not for him, was deciding to stop waiting for acknowledgement and just do the work in front of me. Rosa and the rest of the team, the hotel contracts, the van that needed replacing, the calendar full of events that my grandmother had spent 30 years earning. That's what she left me. Not just a business. A reason to keep moving forward, even when everything felt unfair and cold and wrong. Resilience isn't something you develop in good moments. It develops in the weeks after a funeral, when you're moving your things into a rented room and you have $5,000 and a sealed note and no idea what comes next. It develops when you make the choice, quietly, with no audience, to keep going anyway. I'm still learning from her. I think I will be for a long time.